EM Weekly starting right now.
We've got to graduate inside emergency management community and realize that the emergency manager is not just, possibly a first responder in their local community, but they may come in and do hundreds of millions of dollars that they have to help local officials understand how to utilize.
Welcome to EM Weekly, and this is your host, Todd DeVoe speaking. Today, we're going to be talking to FEMA Administrator Brock Long, and it's pretty exciting to have him on talking directly to emergency managers about the direction of FEMA, his ideas of what an emergency manager really is and should be and could be. Some of the areas that we really kind of focused on in this conversation was internships and how through internships you can develop emergency managers from the ground up. The cool part about Brock is that he is a pure emergency manager. He was never a first responder, didn't come from that side of the equation. He was an emergency manager from when he graduated from college, and obviously still is, right? It's a little bit different, a different idea. A couple things that he really wants to focus on here is the non-Stafford Act disasters, revamping the Stafford Act, that type of stuff. An emergency management academy, and I'll let him kind of talk about that. And I don't want to get too into detail of what I spoke about, but that was kind of exciting. And then the other idea too is having IMT teams be kind of like the way the USAR teams are set up. Trends in emergency management. In Southern California, there were some mudslides that killed a handful of people and destroyed a bunch of homes. Had about 300 people stuck in there. The 101 freeway is closed down. So it was pretty devastating. So it was really debris flow. And if you've seen the video of it, you can see how devastating it was. One of the things that came out of this thing, though, is that some of the residents are complaining that emergency management didn't do enough in the warning. And the evacuation was set out as being a volunteer evacuation. To boot, this was the same area that was evacuated due to the wildfires just a few weeks ago. So I think some people were definitely just over leaving their home. And when it came out as a voluntary evacuation, they just didn't take heed. And I think we're going to have an issue going forward with this here. Let's see how it plays out. What do we talk about with evacuations, mandatory versus volunteer? What does that mean to the messaging to the people that are involved? If you remember, we just had an episode talking about messaging to people and what it means to them compared to what it means to us. So I think that's something we should really keep an eye on. See how that plays out. I'm excited to have you guys here again. If you could, go into the comment area of your iTunes or however you listen to the podcast and just tell us how you're doing. Again, if you're listening to this from one of those devices and haven't been to the website, it's www.emweekly.com. We also have the Ask Todd button over there. And you can also comment on EM Weekly as well. Speaking of Ask Todd, a question came out regarding internships, mentorships, and the like. And one of the guys who reached out to us was asking regarding if we could become a mentor. And I had to think about that for a little bit of exactly what did it mean. Had a conversation with the young man, and he just wasn't really right there at the point to where a mentorship would pay out. However, I think that concept is really kind of cool. He is a guy that was looking to get into emergency management, and he was just starting out his education. He hasn't completed his bachelor's degree, works some volunteer stuff, but was really interested, or is really interested in emergency management. I think an internship would do well for him, and depending on what he wants to go into. I think the really difference between the internship and the mentorship, and this is just my opinion, and if you disagree with me, please let me know, is I think internship is where you go and learn what the business is about, and the mentorship is more along the lines of how do we get you to the next level of being a practitioner in emergency management. And I think that if we had internships available for people, which I know there are out there, and if we had a mentorship program, I think that would be a really kind of a cool idea to be able to bring people up to the next level, whether if it's an official mentorship program or if it's not. So I think that's something we should discuss a little bit as in the industry, whether we do it through like IEM or through other local state organizations for emergency management. I like the idea of having the EM mentor, of getting a person who's brand new and getting somebody who's seasoned and knows what's going on and get them under their wing and kind of help that person through that process. That's sort of the take from Ask Todd. I appreciate the question. All right, well, enough of me talking. Let's listen to the interview with FEMA Administrator Brock Long.
Hi, and today I'm excited to have with me FEMA Administrator Brock Long, who is a true emergency manager. If you guys don't know much about him, he came from North Carolina and then ended up in Georgia, which is the question I'm going to ask him here shortly. And going from there, he actually was on some pretty extensive and large-scale disasters, and the biggest one that I think everybody here can really get their minds around is the Deepwater Horizon, which was an amazing, crazy response. If you've ever been to any of the debriefings on that, it's one of those emergency management career pinnacle nightmares, and also a way to see how incident command and unified command works. So, Brock, welcome to EM Weekly.
Hey, glad to be here, Todd. Thank you for allowing me to be on this podcast. Thank you.
How did you get into emergency management?
Todd, that's a great question. For me, it was divine intervention. I think emergency management found me. And the reason I say that is that when I was attending Appalachian State University for my MPA, I had a conversation with a classmate in the hallway and asked, his name was Eddie Smith. He's with the city of Kannapolis, and I asked him what he did for his internship that summer, and he said he had done it with New Hanover County, North Carolina Emergency Management Agency. And started talking to me, and I became more and more interested in the conversation and followed up. And fortunately, I was able to make the same connection with New Hanover County. And the following summer, I did an internship in emergency management at the local level, and I've never looked back. I've spent my whole career in emergency management, which is pretty rare.
How did you end up in Georgia from North Carolina?
Oddly enough, I sent my resume to several state emergency management agencies in states I thought I wanted to live in. And Georgia Emergency Management Agency was the first one to respond to me sending the resumes that were there. They were setting up an innovative school safety program because Georgia ranked number one in the country at the time. This was all before Columbine. They ranked number one in the country for the most amount of deaths in schools. And so they set up an innovative school safety program that I got in on the ground floor of and served as a school safety coordinator and local emergency operations planner in that capacity. And again, it was all before Columbine, so pretty interesting. And then from there, I became a hurricane program manager. I was with Georgia Emergency Management Agency and experienced Hurricane Floyd in 1999. And then I interviewed with FEMA Region 4 on the morning of 9/11, but eventually became the Hurricane Program Manager in charge of a lot of evacuation planning and running a couple response teams known as the Hurricane Liaison Team down at the National Hurricane Center, as well as helping to establish what's now known as the Evacuation Liaison Team that USDOT runs on behalf of FEMA.
You're doing this, and then somehow or another you get wrapped up into the Deepwater Horizon. How did you feel when you got tapped on the shoulder for that?
It's interesting. I always joke that every time I change jobs, something catastrophic happens. And as you can see, I was in office 2 months as FEMA Administrator, and we got hit with an unprecedented amount of events. But, yeah, so I was appointed by Governor Bob Riley in Alabama to be Alabama's Emergency Management Director. And basically, one of the events, not only did we go through Deepwater Horizon, but we also had H1N1 at the time. So there were two very unique events that were taking place that I was hit with. But Deepwater Horizon was incredibly complex. And, what the takeaway from Deepwater Horizon is that we got a lot of work to do, in my opinion, on the non-Stafford disasters in this country as to who takes the leadership role and making sure that we fine-tune how incident command works for these unique events.
One of the things that I think is important for emergency management is the professionalization of our profession, right? And as we know, like you said, you are one of the rare ones where you've been in EM for your entire career, but you see a lot of, and I'm using this term not in the derogatory term because I'm one of them, but you see a lot of these guys who are retreads from either fire, EMS, police, that get into EM as a second career or as a retirement career where they think they can come in and just start doing the stuff from the field. I'm excited to see a lot of the education programs that are coming in, kind of like University of Albany, where the governor there thought that it was important to start a program at that level in emergency management. Obviously, University of Delaware has been doing it for a long time, but they're changing their focus from just the strict social impacts of disasters into actual disaster management. And you see them at the local community colleges as well, going up all the way to PhD programs now. That being said, what can we do as a profession to help professionalize EM? One follow-up on that is that I heard that you were interested in doing like an FBI type academy for emergency managers, and how would that look?
Todd, it's an excellent question. So there are a lot of answers to this question, but from where I sit, as a result of going through this unprecedented 2017 disaster calendar year, the one thing that stands out to me more than any is we need highly trained people rather than stuff. And, and it's not just within FEMA. At one point, a majority, I think 85% of our entire agency was deployed out in the field at one point during the hurricane season. And the bottom line is that we have to continue to find ways to improve consistent and good training and cross-training down not only through the federal government, through the Department of Homeland Security surge capacity, but going down towards the state and local level. And so we're actively, as a result of going through the 2017 disaster year, looking at how we actually may change the IMAT team concepts to go possibly to more of a USAR team concept, to where we start formulating 20 or 30 IMAT teams within each state and local or local jurisdictions that we can call upon for additional staff support. One of the things that I think FEMA needs to work on in regards to the FBI Academy vision is that I fully believe that we need to bring in people. If we can bring people in at a consistent level and to explode the entire way that we hire inside the agency, so that we're not, hiring people at high level positions, but that actually we're cultivating people all the way up through the organization. And so if we look at a true academy style hiring process, it does a couple things. It creates camaraderie within the agency. It creates consistency within the training. And what I ultimately would love to be able to do is recruiting classes, all walks of life, being able to recruit in classes, send them to Emmitsburg for 16 weeks to do true academy-style training, learning all things Stafford Act, all things 2CFR, all things FEMA policy, all things case study, running through the different directorates and the different phases of emergency management to understand not only the policies but the training needs, the goals and the gaps that we have to overcome. And then ultimately, once they graduate from the academy, you send them out into the field. So I have a larger vision of creating state integration teams where it's time to break down the walls of the FEMA regional office. And I would like to be part of the conversation inside state agencies and embed staff, a multidisciplined staff inside state agencies and eventually larger cities, to where, we're being able to execute Blue Sky Day, preparedness, mitigation functions, training and exercise functions. We're a part of the everyday conversation and not just being invited once a federal disaster declaration hits comes into place. And so I want to be part of the Blue Sky Day conversation, as well as have staff there to quickly roll over into incident management at that state and local level, similar to the way the FBI looks. So once you graduate from an academy, it would be great to be able to send emergency managers out to one of these state integration teams for 3 to 5 years so that they fully understand how state and local governments receive FEMA assistance of all types and guidance, how to implement that. And then once they're done there, with the state integration teams, then hopefully they're allowed to apply to one of the 3 FEMA regions, or one of the 10 FEMA regions that they want to serve in, and we put them where they're most aligned and where that we think they'll perform great. And then they work their way up to headquarters to actually design policies and programs and the way forward. So it's a grand vision. It's a lot that may not be able to get put into place in 4 years, but at least I can start to lay the foundation for a grander vision for how this agency looks in the future.
That's something I could definitely get behind, because, we all know in emergency management that the disaster is local. Sometimes I think that the residents and the citizens of the United States believe that FEMA comes in on a white horse and is going to have all the answers to everything. And I know that you're going through that right now with Puerto Rico and some of the issues that are going down there. How do we help from the federal level, the locals do a better job of understanding emergency management in the sense of their roles and responsibilities in the response and the recovery?
Well, at the local and state level, I think that resiliency lies in the hands of local elected officials. And I believe that as a result of going through the 2017 disaster year, that state representatives, state legislatures, and local elected officials need to hit the reset button and take a look at whether or not they're fully funding their local and state emergency management agencies with proper staffing and equipment. This is the trend, and we're going to go in and see more disasters. Well, then budgets and emphasis needs to reflect that. Anytime that FEMA is the primary and sole responder into a location, that's not optimal. I believe that the proper disaster response and recovery should be federally supported, state managed, and locally executed. I believe that we also have to graduate past just writing plans to meet accreditation standards. We need to operationalize these plans. We need to overcome a lot of the problems or OIG recommendations or negative audit findings that we have. We have to overcome those on Blue Sky Day by properly setting up contracts ahead of time and, setting up pre-event contracts, making sure that we can actually execute. And if we can't execute from a human capital or physical standpoint, then what's the next way we're going to use mutual aid or, call upon assistance in another way. So there's a lot that we have to work on. But again, I don't own a state or a local government's response or recovery. You are in charge. My goal is to help you at the state and local level achieve your response and recovery and preparedness goals.
I had a conversation with your predecessor regarding the ESFs and that how some states, and the state that I particularly reside in, doesn't really put stock into the ESFs, but I do see it as being a quality issue specifically with training and whatnot, knowing that who you're going to get and the typing type thing. Do you think that we should really be pushing that type of training and function into each state to make it mandated, or do you still think that the state should be able to choose to go ESF or not?
I come from the school where I get really nervous about mandating what a state or local government should do. Largely the direction that I would like us to move is how do we help you achieve your goals? I don't know what's best for your state or your local jurisdiction. I may be able to, and from my position, I do have a responsibility to recognize national gaps where national gaps exist and start forcing conversation and action to be taken to overcome those gaps as I see them, if there's trends that are taking place. But largely, I want to circle back to creating consistency and doing true integration planning. Our hope is to, within the next 30, 60 days, to really start rolling out a federal footprint inside these state agencies into states that want them through these integration teams. And so we're picking a few states where we'd like to pilot this to where we come in and we're actually helping you to do the things that I just mentioned, like set up the proper pre-event contracts to do debris or staff augmentation, writing disaster cost recovery plans. We've got to graduate inside emergency management community and realize that the emergency manager is not just, possibly a first responder in their local community, but they may come in and do hundreds of millions of dollars that they have to help local officials understand how to utilize. And it's not just FEMA funds. We have to overcome fragmented recovery, and your emergency manager's got to be able to recognize, once they establish their recovery goals, what agencies provide different funding. And there's over 17 different agencies, if I understand correctly, that provide disaster funding or some type of funding down after a disaster. Which agencies do you grab the funding from and put it together and harness it and use it for the greatest good to help you overcome? And that's what an emergency manager, a large portion of the emergency manager's job is. And so it's not just response. We tend to focus too much on the response and not enough on the long-term recovery aspects. And so I hope through these state integration teams that we can help state and local governments start to truly plan for and achieve, their response and recovery goals, not mine.
Kind of getting back into some of the response side of things. We just had a really large fire here in Northern California, 2 of them. And then on the East Coast, you have these cyclone bomb hitting over there with I always love my weather guys. They like to come up with some funny terms. So over there hitting the Northeast, Boston, the Massachusetts, had that area where the ocean water came in and froze cars to the ground. So the recovery is going to start here pretty shortly in the springtime for all of that. What's that look like for you guys? With now you're still recovering from the hurricane season. Now you get hit with this in January. What's that look like for you guys?
The answer to that question and more when we return from our break.
Emergencies happen, whether they're related to medical emergencies, threats of physical violence, weather-related, or other. One of the most difficult things during an emergency is to find help and quickly and efficiently communicate with all parties, regardless of whether you're an administrator, law enforcement, or the end user. With Titan HST, we help to store time by creating high-tech yet simple-to-use mobile-based applications that connect you with the people who can help you. At Titan HST, we believe in the power of people.
Hi, this is Todd DeVoe from EM Weekly. If your company is in the emergency management and response space, EM Weekly is a place for you to advertise. Each week we bring in experts in emergency management, response, and leadership from around the world, and they're here to share their best practices. Our listeners are eager to learn about new products and ideas, so this is the space for you. For more information, please contact Brian at emweekly.com.
Welcome back from that short break, and let's continue on.
How's that impacting your ability to get out there and help out with those local agencies?
Well, right now, if you look at the three major hurricanes and the Northern California wildfires, we still have 65% of our agency that is deployed across the country, not only helping those four events, but we have, I think, over 30 open disasters right now as we speak in over 22 different jurisdictions, and that includes Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. When it comes to the response, I'm going to be the first one that lets everybody know that FEMA can't do it alone. And we have got to go back and really address specific roles and responsibilities when it comes to what the Federal Emergency Management Agency should be able to do, to implement and to do, versus what state and local agencies all the way down to the citizen level. And one thing I've been very vocal about is, we've got to stop looking at citizens as liabilities and start looking at citizens as the true first responder. And, how are we training them to take action that are low to no cost actions they can take to be better prepared? Or how are we actually, going back to the old civil defense in the 1950s of incorporating them into our activities and response plans, like basically putting CERT teams on steroids and teaching, citizens practical skills like CPR to how to shut off water valves and gas valves and different things. So I think we need a comprehensive overhaul in truly how we approach response, because I don't have enough people to do it, and the mission is growing daily with new threats like North Korea. And so the bottom line is I think that this is a great time to start having some collaborative discussions about the level of disaster and how we manage money and different things. And if you look at the number of disasters that we have in this country, 75% of them are typically under $41 million. What we learned going into Harvey is that we had too many staff deployed to a lot of disasters that are under that threshold of $40 million. And we've got to get to a point where states and local governments are comfortable managing disaster funds to that level without a huge federal footprint of staff to do it and to lead it, on behalf of a state and local government, so that when the worst day hits, when New Madrid, occurs or Cascadia occurs, the Federal Emergency Management Agency can truly do catastrophic response and recovery. That's where you're going to want us most, not in the smaller $40 million disasters.
I want to circle back a little bit on the citizen response. I'm a big proponent of the community emergency response teams, as you mentioned. Can we really look at Citizen Corps and see what we can do to rejuvenate that and get it as on top of the ladder, if you will, that it was in the back, or is this something that's going to kind of stay in the back burner because of funding?
Todd, I'm willing to look at anything, but I think I've actually got a broader vision. For the Be Ready campaign, we got to graduate past telling everybody to be ready for 3 days because it's an unrealistic financial ask in many households, and that kind of thing. The other thing that we got to do is that across the federal government perspective and in a state government or a local government, each one of these agencies is doing some level of readiness or preparedness campaigning, like HHS and CDC, FEMA. NOAA has, some pretty robust public awareness campaign efforts and that kind of thing. It's time to pull our resources together, come together, and ask each other what the goal is when it comes to helping citizens truly recognize their risk, their true risk and vulnerabilities, not only where they live, but where they work, where they visit, how to assess those risks, make the right decisions on the proper level of insurance, how they're going to communicate, et cetera, to where they truly become, ready to be the first responder when called upon. And, if you look at, just the statistics, if you lived in Alabama, Todd, we have, a ton of tornadoes that go through there. If a tornado went barreling through your community and knocked your neighbor's house down and you happen to be there, you're going to turn into the first responder. How do you do simple search and rescue? What actions should you take to be able to do that? If you're involved in an active shooter, a majority of the FBI statistics would suggest that the victims become the true first responder. How are we actually training them, incorporating them into our preparedness, rather than just first responders saying, here's what it's going to look like when we respond to an active shooter event? We've got to start giving them tangible skills in what to do during those types of events. So it's not just beefing up, Citizen Corps and those types and CERT teams. We've got to get back into the classroom and through the U.S. Department of Education. We've got to teach people how to save money. We've got to teach people why they need insurance, not only for their household, but also for their business. We need to make continuity of operations a part of all phases of emergency management and have those discussions. And we have to recognize how these campaigns change or how the response will change. And something that we learned in most recently, not only in the California wildfires, but also in Puerto Rico, is that people are becoming more and more dependent on digital technology, cell phone technology, but yet the systems that we're putting in place, they're not resilient, they're not redundant. And when there's a gap in service, it creates panic and a lack of situational awareness. So how do we collectively start to overcome those or do warning order communication in areas that don't have communication for several weeks? So there's a lot that we've learned, but the one thing is that never before, being the FEMA administrator, I am more than willing to start a collaborative effort to start driving that whole community preparedness and response aspect.
Two things on the technology. One is I want to talk a little bit about FirstNet, and then the other one is about EAS. And let's start with EAS first. The emergency alert system that's out there now, I know it goes over our cell phones and stuff like that for like the Amber Alerts, and it's doable. But so how do we reach people that are now breaking away from cable and traditional mediums for online stuff? How do we reach them with an EAS?
That's an excellent question. And, obviously with IPAWs, that is definitely on the radar screen of those inside FEMA that are administering the IPAWs program. It is a true problem that we face and a dynamic one. It's going to continue to change as technology, goes forward. And so some of the discussions inside, FEMA now is, for example, we're starting to recognize that people are cutting the cord on cable and going to more streaming channels. So why doesn't FEMA have its own streaming network that teaches people how to mitigate their house, to, how to assess their risk and, how to be better prepared? So those are some of the things that we're already starting to address internally. Is we've got to adapt as the citizens adapt on how they absorb information. But also, I think when it comes to like social media and the other outlets that are out there, it's one thing to say you have to have a social media presence, but what we're starting to recognize is that there are different social media platforms that work better in some phases of emergency management better than others. For example, I believe Twitter works in the response phase, not as effective in the longer term recovery phase, in my opinion. And so what are the social media tools? How do we, not only recognize what's out there, but how do we use those to reach different populations at different phases of a disaster?
That's always a tricky thing, because especially like, we go back to Facebook. Facebook was all the rage for a while, but now it seems to be the thing that the kids don't want to do because it's not cool anymore, because once old people start liking Facebook, it's no longer cool. So how do you keep up with technology? I understand that's an issue, or trends, I suppose. That's one of those issues that we have to keep looking at and try to get in front of. And you're right about that. And it's kind of cool that you guys are looking at doing some more innovative stuff with the internet and reaching out to people in that way. So thank you for that. FirstNet. I've been hearing a lot about it. I went to AT&T's presentation on FirstNet. I think it's kind of interesting. What do you think about FirstNet, and do you think it's something that we're going to be able to utilize in the long term?
Well, I definitely think that we can utilize FirstNet. As far as what do I think about it, I don't know if that's up to me. I think each state has already made their preference. A majority of states have already opted into the FirstNet network. Quite honestly, I think I have a lot to learn about how it's being utilized, and I think that anytime we go into a system like that, we have to understand, how it works before, during, and after a disaster. Anytime that we opt into systems and that kind of thing, we have to constantly evaluate what's working and what's not. Where are we versus where we need to be? And if we need to be somewhere else, how do we get there?
Where do you see the future of FEMA going in the next 3 years?
I've got great staff inside FEMA. One of the things that I have inside the Federal Emergency Management Agency and what I want people at the state and local level to know is that I have an incredibly dedicated staff. These guys work long hours, and I think that if the local or state emergency managers that walk in this building that interact with the staff or could see it when it's activated, the National Response Coordination Center is activated, that what they'll find is that a majority of the people inside FEMA understand the issues that local and state, government officials face. It's just a matter of having a voice and being heard and being able to shape the program. So one of the things that we're doing internally is creating an inclusive strategic plan process. And we're going to concentrate on 3 buckets. 1, how do we create a culture of preparedness? 2, how do we truly become ready for the catastrophic disaster or catastrophic readiness? And then 3, how do we reduce the complexity of FEMA programs? And those are going to be the 3 buckets that this agency concentrates on. And not everything conveniently fits into those 3 buckets, but the staff, based on reaching out to them and holding what we call discovery change sessions, inclusive sessions throughout the agency and with our stakeholders, ultimately the ideas and the issues that we face or the things that we need to implement can fit into each one of those buckets. And so that's where we're faced there. Next, as I said, I've got dedicated staff, but the workforce structure inside FEMA that we have to operate in is a little broken. Not only that, but I think that there are some major changes to the Stafford Act that need to be made, that need to be made. And one of the things that I have found is that, after going through the events that we went through, the Congress, the White House, the Department of Homeland Security, they are all ears and have been incredibly supportive of the agency, asking me and asking us what needs to change to get better. And so there are changes that are being made in the housing realm. I think more changes could potentially come with a 3rd supplemental. Major changes to FEMA or to the system could be coming through the 3rd supplemental. I think we need to watch what comes forward, but we may be able to change mitigation forever and get it out of the recovery realm and put it all up front in the pre-disaster realm. And that would be a very major change coming up. So I'm very excited about that, and I hope that the Congress will act to help us do that. And so there's a lot of changes that are coming as a result of going through, and I'm truly excited to be here.
FEMA's training in general is pretty decent, I have to say. What can we do to encourage more people to participate in EMI programs and to standardize what an emergency manager is across the country?
That's great. I'm all for accreditations, and consistent training. I mean, I'm a firm believer in resource typing and NIMS and making sure that we have cross-trained staff. In regards to EMI, we've had internal discussions about what is truly the outcome that we're striving for based on all of the training, that we offer. And I don't think I'm ready to comment on truly what we're searching for at this time, but it is on our radar screen and something that we're truly working through. And it's not only the external training that we offer, but also how, as I go back to the first part of this interview, is we've got to train together internally inside FEMA to create consistencies and camaraderies that will result, into better program and program delivery out in the field. And so there's a lot that could be done. But some of the major gaps that I see across the country goes back to the disaster cost recovery. We have got to start focusing on how to correctly utilize, understand what you're entitled to after a presidential disaster declaration or Stafford Act disaster like Deepwater Horizon, where the Stafford Act, a non-Stafford Act disaster like Deepwater Horizon. What are you entitled to? How do you grab that money? How does the money come down? It doesn't all come at once, but how do you set up recovery goals around the funding you're entitled to and how the cash flow works around that grant funding and tie it all together to do the greatest good? We are not concentrating on that aspect, which is the longest and hardest aspect that leads to the most amount of mistakes down the road. Nationwide, we got to put our fingers back on disaster cost recovery and how we manage a lot of funding.
Okay, so here comes the toughest question of the day. What book or books do you recommend for somebody who is getting into emergency management and or if they're already in the job, leadership?
Rumsfeld's rules for leadership. I like Rumsfeld's rules. All right. Pretty interesting read. Where we are as a nation right now with the North Korea threat and everything else, I mean, there's a true gap in the way we do continuity of operations. We have to resurrect national continuity programs and continuity planning and continuity of government planning across all levels of government, okay? And not only all levels of government, but also in the private sector. And I can tell you, while I'm not going to endorse a book, the book that I'm currently reading is Raven Rock, and it's really interesting to see, go back into history and look at how the public awareness campaigns were put forward. They were much more robust public awareness campaigns and empowering citizens back in the 50s than we're doing today. And we got to get that back. But it also goes into the importance of continuity and how the government works. And with North Korea threats and the changing threats in the cybersecurity world, we really need to focus more on continuity of operations. So how about that?
We're coming up to the end here. Is there anything else you'd like to say to us, to the emergency managers out there that listen to EM Weekly?
Yeah, I believe here again, to me, a successful response and recovery is one that's federally supported, state managed, and locally executed. It's my job to figure out how to get this agency to help you execute and achieve, all of your preparedness, your response and recovery goals. Not dictate it, not run it for you. That's not the goal. That's what I'm here to do, and hopefully we'll accomplish that.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.